field of research.
I can see the promo playing, so yeah.
So we are live now. So let us start. So today's session is by Dr. Robert Lepenies, and he will be giving us a session on the digital science communication for the busy researcher. So let me introduce him first. He is a research scientist at the Helmholtz Centre of Environmental Research in Germany, and he is also an executive committee member of the Global Young Academy. He works on the politics of evidence-based environmental policy and the themes in the philosophy of the social sciences. Currently, he is developing new projects related to the application of the behavioral insights of the Sustainable Development Goals and on themes in water governance and interdisciplinary environmental politics team of the UFC. So thank you, Dr. Robert Lepenies, for joining with us.
Thank you so much, Anisha, and thank you everyone for having me. Thank you, Anindita, for the invitation. I'm excited to present here. It's an honor, actually, and to talk to you about digital science communication in a very digital format. I hope the session will be quite interactive, so I hope you will be using the chat. If you have questions, put a question mark in the chat. If you have comments, an exclamation point. And if you just want to show that you're still listening, put a point in the chat. So if you could do that just now, just showing me that everyone's listening, just put a point, a full stop, a dot in the chat. Perfect, everyone's still listening. That's a good start. Wonderful, let me share my screen to give you an overview of what I would like to speak about. The title of the talk, or more the title of the workshop, is Digital Science Communication for the Busy Researcher. And it starts with, well, the biggest question of the day, namely, what will the future of digital science communication look like? So think about this for a second. Will the future look like a violent spread of misinformation, disinformation, amplified through all the channels of social media, fake news being spread by people you thought they would never spread it? Or could it look more amicably? Could it be a better conversation about the role of science and technology in society, with evidence-informed statements being made in a more harmonious way? Let's think about the future of digital science communication for a bit. I think there's two things that I would like to convey in the talk. First is a plea, a proposal for a new form of digital science communication that's both helping you and is of societal value. Now, this is a pretty big ambition, but it's based on the belief that I think good digital Cycom doesn't need to be expensive or time-consuming. So good digital Cycom can be done on the fly. So part of the workshop or the talk is based on some all-purpose tips that could help you build a community, but I think more importantly, build better conversations across different platforms. The second part is a plea for more self-critical science communication. I'll get into that a little bit, based on the theory of science communication. What models of science communication are there? And when do we actually start thinking about what type of science communicators we want to be? That's going to be the second part. But let's start with the most important question of the day. Who are you? So I would like to know, what's your discipline? What's the field that you work on? What's the field that you work in or study in? What's your previous Cycom experience? if you have them, write some links and just put it in the chat. So what's your field of research? What's your current Cycom or past Cycom experience, and put some links in the chat of your social media handles or certain projects that you work on, just for me to get an overview and for everyone else to get an overview of your experience and viewpoints. I'm going to give this a couple of seconds. Okay, great. We have the first messages in the chat. If you write your discipline in the Google Meet chat and some previous Cycom experiments. Perfect. Wonderful. This will also be helpful for everyone else to connect to each other and learn about your experience. Okay, please keep these comments coming. I will look at them while presenting. So basically what I'm seeing now, and as I was told before, you all, or most of you, have a sciences background and already have some experience, if not considerable experience, in science communication, mostly in an offline way. So part of the talk is about helping you leverage what you did or already do and bring it even more in the digital realm, scaling it up, amplifying what you already do. Great. And if you could also put the social media handles or the social media platforms where you are most active in your science communication, that would also be helpful. That goes for everyone on the call. I see some smiling faces. Very good. Okay. Let's keep this channel of communication open. So this was the most important question. Who are you? And from that brief interlude, you can already see that motivations for science communication vary. They vary a lot. And I think it's time for us to reflect a little more about these motivations. Why are you engaging in science communication? What's the purpose of your engagement with science? And here I would like, it's going to be very interactive. I want you to go to menti.com and use the code that's on the screen. If you have troubles accessing that, then let me know in the chat, then we can skip that part. But I want to know your motivations for why you are engaging in science communication, right? And maybe if someone could put the code in the chat as well, so I can. There we go. That's the Menti code in the chat, where you can also put in the motivations for why you're doing science communication. And hopefully at the end of the presentation, we will have a nice overview, a nice word cloud of why people want to engage in science communication. Okay. But let's not lose too much time on this question. I think motivations for science communication aren't reflected upon enough, because they can range from fairly self-interested motivations, saying, I want to be more visible, I want to have a job in science. A good way to doing that is raising my public profile and pushing my publications out to people. Therefore, I engage in science communication. This is one motivation. And then there's, of course, more altruistic ones where you try to solve big societal problems through your communication. You want to tackle some misinformation, you want to correct some facts, and so on. And there's a huge continuum, a huge diversity of these motivations. And I'm not saying that any of those is more or less legitimate. They also vary across time and between scientists. So your motivation for doing Cycoms might be completely different than your friend's motivation, and they might vary over your lifetime or over your career as a scientist. But it's always good to know the reason for why you're engaging in science communication in the first place. And as part of the workshop, I hope to give maybe some possible answers for why you could do science communication in a more reflective way. But this is kind of the more kind of theoretical part. I also try to give you some all-purpose suggestions that help you, whatever your motivation is for doing Cycom, that help you maybe get a bigger following or get more people listening on hearing or viewing your communication. Okay, let's jump right in. This is an overview of the world's most used social platforms based on data from last month. And of course, this is highly contextual. You see some of the platforms aren't even available in India. Some of them are blocked, for example, TikTok. It matters hugely of where you are and who you want to reach, how you engage in these platforms. So there's no one size fits all. But there is one fact about digital science communication, which is that people spend a lot of time on their phones, all of us. And whether you like it or not, that's a fact. People seem to find more and more time during the day, not being on the site, but doing something and being on the site. So when I look back on when my 3 kids were very small, I, of course, didn't have time always to work and read papers, but more often than not, I was able to look at my phone, checking on a conference thread, reading a conversation about people in my field on Twitter, looking at what people shared in terms of announcements on Facebook and so on. So people seem to be able to find more and more time looking at their phones. And I guess this is a trend that will continue. So in most cases, science communication is digital science communication. There's, of course, one big difference between these sites, and this is the concept of organic reach. And this is something that I would like to talk a little bit about. So organic reach is the idea that you can reach people by posting, even if you don't have any connections to them. And this is something that as digital science communicators you should be aware of. So which sites currently have a good organic reach? Right now, this is TikTok, but it can change. And it is especially LinkedIn, meaning that if you post something on LinkedIn, which is increasingly a social media platform rather than just a jobs or network site, it will be seen by many new people that have no connection to you. So if you want to have something seen, pay attention to the organic reach of the different platforms. So for example, on Instagram right now, it's quite unlikely that a new post will be seen by lots of new people. And that fluctuates and it varies across time. So it's helpful to spend a little bit of time investing in education about, okay, what platform will actually get my content shown to new people, to different people. And this comes to a theme of Cycom on the fly, or you could also call it Cycom for the 99%. We're all busy researchers. We all are reading, writing, teaching, applying for grants. And for most of the scientists, science communication is not the majority of what they do, and is something that they're definitely not getting paid for. So I would encourage us as scientists to embrace an attitude of science communication on the fly, doing it in a parallel way, doing it while we're doing other things. And these are kind of some of the principles that I would like to introduce, which is not thinking about science communication as creating something new, but about documenting or recording what you are already doing. And every one of you, as I see now in the chat, has super interesting stories to tell. And you don't need to spend a lot of time worrying about light quality, audio quality, production value, and so on. It's much easier for you and to just document and record what you already do. Are you reading an interesting paper right now for some other work? Give a short overview on it on LinkedIn or Twitter. Just write a couple of paragraphs about it. Are you preparing for a thesis defense? Share the experience of doing that. Like, what worries you? What are your expectations? What are your motivations? On YouTube, for instance, or in other short form video platforms. Science communication is not just sharing the facts, but also sharing the process of science and this kind of behind the scenes, and whether you're a lab manager or esteemed professor or a bachelor students, I think what's needed is more science communication from the 99%. So those that don't have the massive studio budget and can, film and invest in an expensive story for several hours a week, but science on the fly. So I would encourage more people to do that. And I think it would hold high social value of doing so. So the second point is a focus on quantity, not quality. And this is something where scientists first go, oh my God, how can you say that? Science is all about quality. Of course, I mean, what would science if we weren't rigorous, if we weren't careful, if we wouldn't focus on quality as the key characteristic of good science? But this is science communication. Science communication, of course, needs to be good. But in the digital age that we live in, science communication needs to be plentiful. There need to be lots of opportunities to see your science or to see your arguments about science. Being on top of the Twitter feed or the Facebook feed or other feeds are only, this is only something that's achievable if you post often. Now you can post quality often, 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. You can retweet yourselves. So you can repost quality very often. And that's and you're not going to overcrowd the digital space, because everyone finds more and more time to post more and more things. But I would encourage, especially scientists who are so stuck in this mindset of quality, to engage in a quantitative way online. Much more. We need much more of you posting much more often. Then the question is, okay, but who's actually listening to us and who's participating? And here, I think one key, and I now see that my numbering is a bit off, 1, 2, 3, 3. It's not intentional. The idea is to provide some value. So a good kind of, I guess there are 2 good principles in thinking of whether you should post something. One is the principle, would you like to see it on the front page of the newspaper tomorrow? So this is a kind of a test, like, don't post anything outrageous or toxic or demeaning or like punching downwards or so on. Would you be fine in seeing it and everyone else seeing it tomorrow on a newspaper? This is one principle. And the second principle is, are you providing value to others? Are you improving someone else's life? Are you making their day better? This can be like through encouragement, or you making a productive critique of something. Are you trying to push the conversation forward? So the less kind of self-centered, the better. It's more likely that you will gain more followers if you create more value. Of course, we know in the attention economy, if you are like making big accusations and if you spread misinformation, that will also get followers, right? That's also a way. But I think the science communication on the fly, following these 2 principles, might give you and build you a nice community. And that's the last point. Science communication should be less about telling your audience and just providing the facts, but engaging in a conversation about your community. And if you look now at the Menti that I shared, then I already see a lot of whys. So let's see if I can share this in the Menti at least. Okay, if you can see the Menti results on the Menti page, If you could just give me an exclamation point in the chat, that would be helpful. I can share it right now in the... Okay, so you see the multiple motivations for why people are engaging in Cycom. Okay. I want to focus on a place where this type of science communication is currently done. So where is this science communication on the fly currently practiced? What would you say in the chat is the future of digital science communication right now? Where is really exciting, innovative science communication happening? What do you think? Can you put it in the chat? From your perspective, where's innovative, new, progressive science communication happening right now? YouTube, okay. Blogs, Instagram, Twitter. Of course, there's also innovative stuff happening in person, great, so different social media platforms. Great. Of course, you need to mention the good educational institutes that are doing progressive science communication. Excellent. Good. I think a trend that's increasingly happening in the digital sphere is video apps and short-form video content. So this is what I'm going to focus on a little bit now. I think when looking at phenomena such as TikTok, we can learn a lot about where science communication is heading right now and where it could be heading in the future too. So I'm talking about TikTok, Reels, and Shorts, and really it doesn't matter that much which exact platform we are talking about, because I think it's the principles behind the platform that are important and that have been proven very, very successful. So you have the ability with your phone to share, to use video apps that allow you to have a full video production studio on your handheld computer, and it keeps people super active and engaged. You have lots of creative AI filters. And I think the biggest misconception here is that people think that this is just for kids, right? But this is simply not the case. Many, many people are actually engaging in this video platforms in a quite, like, even if they're older, if they're more senior, and this is borne out by the data. And this is a fact that's increasingly true for all social media platforms. They started with a young audience, but then they get more and more and more older and mature. And people are already spending a lot of time on this. And I think just following how people communicate on these sites is important to understand kind of the future of science communication, because it's not just science communication, but a new mode of communication in society. So I would actually encourage you to spend more time on these platforms. And it doesn't really matter which one it is, whether it's TikTok or Reels or Shorts, because increasingly people just cross-post their content. And now that I see that in the chat, you already mentioned that you are engaging in lots of in-person science communication, I would encourage you to always bring a camera, always record it, always post it on YouTube, on TikTok, on Instagram, on Reels. Just record it once, and then you can take the audio, use it for a podcast, take snippets, put it on Twitter. And the more you kind of automate these processes, the less work, the less time it will take. The good thing is this is all free. I mean, you pay with your data and with your surveillance, and there's huge ethical issues with this, but generally it's free. So I would encourage you to just cross post your content and always bring a camera.
Sorry for
Yeah,
interrupting, but would
sure.
you like to take questions in the end or now?
Sure. If people have questions now, they can also ask them now. Or what would be your suggestion, Amisha?
I would say it depends on you. Then I saw Shraddha raising her hand, so maybe she has a question.
Yeah, great. If it's okay with you, Anusha, we could take questions during the talk. Would that be fine? Good.
Yes, yes. Okay, Shraddha, do you have any question? I saw you raised your hand.
No, ma'am, I don't have any questions. So this is just happening with my Google Meet. Sorry.
Interruption?
No, it's totally fine. If you have burning questions, please post them also in the chat. Then I can react directly, or if you want to say something, then just let me know also in the chat. And at the end of the talk, yes, I hope there will be some time and space for Q&A, Anwisha, and some more direct engagement too. Great. So thank you so much. So there is some people in the science and society literature that that called for not the facts, but also the process of science, the shaping argument of, to build trust in science, we need to not just show the facts, but really how. And short form video platforms offer this opportunity in a very new way. You have here, for example, Lab Shenanigans. As you see, I think right now they have nearly 1 million followers. And this is basically funny videos, funny content about the everyday life of a lab manager from the perspective, making fun but very casual videos, always in the same setting, about what it's like to participate in the project of science. And I think that this aspect of science communication is growing and interesting and open to everyone who's somehow involved in science. So I'd encourage you to check this account out and the many others like it, and think about what you could do in the same vein. Likewise, you have, I think, a new generation of science communicators that are, because of this very new interactive format of showing your face and having all these filters and having access to a huge music library and just the capabilities of being so creative on your phone while not spending a lot of time on it. It just works very quickly. You have lots of new people that would kind of represent new faces of science. We are more aware of the diversity of science and the new voices that are coming and that are kind of pushing through. And I think this is a really interesting and good development. At the same time, we have also more candid discussions about science. So here you have a couple of great accounts from Stina or Chaotically Science or Professor Bren, who often in a funny way also talk about issues of discrimination or non-inclusivity or the barriers or precarity of young researchers, or just the bad feeling that you have when reviewer 2 trashes your paper, or you have a bad thesis defense or whatever else. So it's basically putting a more human side to science and showing the diversity of science communication and communication about science. And I think that's something related to the platform that allows that. So what can we learn from our science communication from these new platforms? I believe this is the frontier of digital science communication right now. There's something about the reach of these platforms. We talked earlier about organic reach, that you don't have any followers, you can post something, whether it's reels or shorts, and many eyes will see it that have no connection to you. So that's an opportunity for you. If you just go somewhere and give a talk, kind of classic science communication, that is of course very impactful, but there's very little chance that it kind of could scale, that you could take advantage of the attention economy or the algorithms that dominate the digital space. So the easiest way to do it is just to record it and put it up there and archive it. It's about documenting, not so much, and recording, and not so much about creating something completely new. These new forms of science communication work with very authentic people, and personality is key. So it's less that that organizations have successful accounts there. So there are actually very few science organizations that are successful on these video platforms. They're more successful, for example, on YouTube. Successful, just mentioned, just understood as follower counts or view counts or download counts, which I know when you think about what is the purpose of science communication, it's not just who gets the most followers and who gets the most views, but it helps if you at least have some followers or some community so that your ideas, message, publications, and output get spread. I think all in all, the key takeaway is that there's a new form of communication going on. We can learn a lot from communication science here, communication studies, and in general, the value of the humanities is extremely important here to understand what is happening with how people talk around the world and talk around us. And before posting, I think we should encourage our students, our staff, professors, lab managers to actually use the time during the day, during work, on social media. I would encourage professors, I would encourage lab managers, I would encourage students, of course not mindlessly wasting away, but some of what other people would call, oh, she's just on social media, is actually understanding how we communicate as scientists. It's understanding how the world around us communicates. And I think as scientists, we are not heard enough on these platforms. We are not engaging enough in the comments. We are not present enough in the digital realm. And I would encourage institutions to value spending time on social media. Now, having said that, maybe in the chat you can write if you like. How much time do you think would you have to spend on social media to say it's a waste of time? Would you say more than 30 minutes a day is a waste of time? More than 3 hours a waste of time? Or does it totally depend on how you use it? Give me maybe some answers in the chat. That might be interesting. So how much time should you spend on social media? So there are, of course, limitations to these video apps. They're not directly useful for your own research. If you're thinking about a career in science, then a good TikTok video will not get you tenure track, of course. And it's not directly helpful in generating new ideas or new research ideas and finding out about the research of others, which you can have on other platforms or for networking. But there are huge data, privacy, ethical issues, censorship, surveillance, geopolitical issues. Many of these sites are not disability friendly. So there are huge ethical concerns with these new video platforms, especially true for TikTok, but also for others. And in general, most of this social media landscape is dominated by corporate players. And they kind of dictate on how digital communication functions. So there are very few genuinely open software solutions for how we communicate digitally. So this is a problem, and I don't think the scientific community has reacted to that at all. There's no Facebook for scientists, or there's no open access open software equivalent that I know of. So that's a tricky issue, and I think that's an issue that we'll have to deal with as a scientific community for some time to come. Right now, the algorithms are also biased in many ways, biased on on the facial recognition software, how it corresponds very much with the faces that it was trained with. If it's been trained with white faces, of course, it will be more attentive to white faces and so on. But you also have a Western bias on content on many of these sites, depending on the algorithm. If the algorithm picks up mostly regional audiences around you, you will be more likely to hear from people around you, people who are similar to you, and so on. So there's a variety of different biases that vary according to the platform too, that we have to be mindful of. And as I said, these video apps are good for individuals, but they're less helpful for organizations. mostly because authenticity and personality counts, and often institutions don't have a personality, are less entertaining, so it's harder for organizations to cut through. Exactly. Okay, if you're still with me, give me a point, a dot in the in the comments. Excellent, very attentive audience. That's what I love. Some kind of all-purpose tips for engaging in video apps is engaging frequently and quickly. This is kind of the idea of engaging in quantity, not just in quality. Thinking about science communication as having cumulative value. You don't need to post the perfect video. You just need to be consistently giving people reasons to follow you and kind of create that funnels. You know, in the business world, you talk about communication funnels. It's the idea of how to get people to convert for you to sell them their product. But as scientists, we don't want to sell products, right? We have many different other ambitions. For example, sharing knowledge. I mean, sharing knowledge, or promoting your paper. That I guess is the most instrumental reason. But you know, helping society make better conversations about science and technology, and having a better evidence-based discussion. But you shouldn't just think about this one product like your dissertation or your thesis and then it's finished. And this is a different logic than the science communication logic. Science communication logic needs to be more cumulative. It's the short, good morning, everyone, how's your day, is already science communication because it might lead people to your thesis or to a network of other scientists. So I would encourage people to think about science communication in a very cumulative way, not in a very discrete way. And then, as I said, these new platforms allow low threshold forms of engagement. And key to that is trying things out, listening, communicating, downloading new apps, trying out things. And maybe there's a kind of an optional piece of homework here. If you like, please make a reel or a short using a filter sound that you've never used before. Download the new app, do it and link me and the organizers in what you produce. And maybe if there's a next installment of the series, let's see what you did and how they performed. So here's a little homework exercise. Okay, before I talk about Twitter for scientists, do you have any questions or comments? If so, please let me know in the chat. Okay, great. Let's talk about Twitter for scientists, because I think it's still one of the key platforms for science communication. And I want to know from you in the chat, are you on Twitter? If you have an exclamation, you just write yes or no. Are you on Twitter? Yes or no? Okay, very active participants. Great. Wonderful. And feel free to share your handle later so that you can all connect to each other. You should all be connected. Great. And I would encourage you, and I said, are you on Twitter? And with that, I meant, of course, do you have a Twitter account? But I think everyone should be on Twitter in the sense of at least lurking or checking, monitoring what is going on Twitter. And even if you don't have an account, I think it's absolutely vital that that you are that you're monitoring it. And actually, I think if you're educating people, if you have PhD students, I think you should actively encourage them to get smart about Twitter and other platforms. And I try to explain a little bit what that means. So Twitter for scientists. Twitter is enormously helpful for multiple purposes. And as you are all on there, I can be a bit faster on this because you know it so well. Here is what I would see from my perspective if I open it up on my phone. It's important and helpful for research and networking opportunities. But it's also helpful if you're engaged in science policy. So if you want to influence decision makers, if you want to connect to decision makers, especially as a young scientist, Twitter is enormously helpful, because if you thought that scientists spent a lot of time on Twitter, you would be surprised how much time decision makers spent on Twitter. People who work in ministries, people in funding agencies, people in NGOs or community leaders are on Twitter a lot, and this is a trend that's nearly true for every country in the world. So being on Twitter is usually the way that many decision makers get their first news or information. So if you want to strategically get into a conversation with them, you should follow them, and you should even have like notifications on the specific people that you would want to interact with, and so on. Being a good scientist on Twitter means, and we talk about what it means to build a community and how to be a wholesome participant. But let's talk strategy and tactics first. You should know the search bar inside out. When I'm on Twitter, I don't spend much time on the feed. I don't go scrolling through what everyone said. I go in there very strategically thinking about, okay, what has happened in my field? Here you see, for example, a search bar term. What has happened? Who has mentioned the term behavioral economics within a specific time? You can go on the search in the search bar, and there are some like checkboxes that you can configure, but actually try to understand how the language of the search bar actually works, so that you can more creatively use it. So for here, for example, all tweets that mention the term behavioral economics will be shown in this specific time period that have a minimum number of retweets of 100. So okay, what have been the most successful or the most visible arguments on a specific term in a specific time frame. For example, if you wanted to know who's the first person on Twitter that sent something about, for example, coronavirus response or a specific therapeutics or whatever, you can quickly pinpoint it in the conversation. So using the Twitter search bar is hugely important and impactful. You can curate Twitter lists, and this will be helpful not just for yourself, but also for others to seep through the noise a little bit, to reduce the noise a little bit, get clearer information, segment different institutional accounts according to your interests and preferences. And as I said, use DMs, so the direct messages, especially if you want to engage with policymakers. Once you are on Twitter, you will get and you create value, you will get increasing number of followers, and then you have additional communication channels that you don't have on other platforms. I'd like to steal a couple of nice pointers from Philip Cohen, who's a professor at the University of Maryland, I believe. And he summarized what it's like to be a good participant on this platform better than I could. So I basically took the 10 pointers for being an excellent tweeter on here, and I'd like to go through them quickly. So, and I think this would help you build a community that's a nice and wholesome Twitter community, rather than a toxic or bad or negative community. So it's always good to be generous, but it's especially important to be generous on social media, where toxicity spreads so fast. Try to share things that are helpful, that give value to others. Try to lift up those who have little visibility. If you see that people ask questions that don't have a lot of followers, try to amplify them. So try to help others also on digital media, and that ultimately will also help your follower count, but it will just make you a better online person, I guess. But at the same time, be shameless. So post your work not once, post your work as often as you want. It's no one will say, oh my God, this person posts so much about their own work. If you also post about others, lifting others up, also share their work. Share your work often, share others people's work also often, but don't be shy, especially if you're female, especially if you are an early career scientist, especially if you're not that visible. Don't be shy about your own achievements on social media, because otherwise people won't see it. It's helpful to look at some exemplars, so people role models that you look up to, and see how they communicate on Twitter and learn a lot about this. But block those that take away from your mental health. Digital engagement can be very taxing, and of course not. There are lots of trolls out there, and there's lots of toxicity. And of course, take any break you want. Of course, you know, you should, if you want to have a large following, you should be posting regularly and so on. But of course, things like this can take a toll on mental health, and that your mental health and your health is the most important thing. So of course, take breaks if you don't want to engage. And I think I only copied the first seven pointers. Be a friend, meaning curating certain relationships in your field. Reporters, journalists that work on your field, follow them and try to think through their perspective, what would they need? Is there specific new paper that came out that you can quickly rephrase in like 2 bullet points that would help a reporter out, and so on. Listen and reach beyond your network. So that's the 6th point. It's not just about disseminating. I will talk about this in a bit. It's about listening. It's again about sharing the work of others, and don't take things so personally. Don't grouse about credit, I think, is a very good suggestion. You know, don't worry about people not citing you or not mentioning you. This is an ongoing conversation, and just like try to take a step back and lift up the others, and worry less about whether people credit you or not. And again, and this is very critical, don't punch down. It's very easy to get angry on Twitter. It's very easy to be on the right side of a group and ousting people and looking and being angry and mad about people who did something wrong. And we all feel very tempted to doing so. And I really try to refrain from punching down ever. I really try to not doing that, even if it's if it looks like, oh my God, this person really said something horrible, said something wrong. Try to not punch down. If punching, try to punch up, if at all. But in generally, less punching, more constructive sharing, I guess, would be my advice. Okay, some very good tips from Philip Cohen. I guess the conclusion of both these segments is it's possible, it's easy, it's relatively cheap. If you have to invest some time, but it's not otherwise materially cheap, expensive. You can easily build a community and reach thousands by simply recording your day-to-day as a scientist. Experiment, listen, download the app, contribute. Okay, now this is a break. What's the worst science communicator? So we talked about building nice communities and happy thoughts, happy places. But what, in your view, makes a science communicator really, really bad? And I want to hear from you. And I want to hear from you on Menti again. Please use the code 42207422 and tell me what makes a science communicator really bad. Let's see if it works already. Or you can put it here in the chat too, using 2 long sentences and complicated ones. Very true. I'm often a culprit in that. What are other things that make a science communicator a really bad science communicator? Promoting pseudoscience. Oh yeah, that's a really bad one. I think I need to open up voting real quick. 1 second. 1 second. Okay, it should be open now. Right, so it works now. What does a really bad science communicator look like? Please contribute your findings on Menti, on the code you see here in the presentation. Good. All right. Low confidence is the first answer. Okay, and keep on building that. Promotes pseudoscience, uses jargons. Excellent. And many of these things have already been addressed in the last couple of presentations that you saw. So, okay, and if someone could also copy some of the answers in the chat into the Menti, that would be super interesting. And then I share it with the group later. Great. So this is the worst science communication. We don't want to be the worst science communication, of course. Excellent science communication looks differently to different people. And I want to share kind of a new path for science communication that I would call self-critical science communication a little bit. And now it gets a little bit philosophical or theoretical even. Because what I do think, well, the first part was about trying to figure out a new form of giving a status report about science communication that's helping you and is of societal value, talking about science communication that's not expensive, not time consuming, and giving some practical tips. But let's talk about kind of the theory of science communication and different models of science communication, and me inviting you to think about critical and self-critical science communication. So what does it mean? It means rethinking the standard Cycom model of expert-publics interaction from a dissemination to a co-production model. Okay, well, so what does it mean? Many critics say that the standard model in which science communicators operate is a dissemination model. It's disseminating facts to audiences, rather than a co-production model where we engage with different publics, not just the public, an amorphous thing, but different communities and different contexts. So here are kind of three models of science communication that many different contributors in the literature point to. So one is thinking about the supply of science. It's thinking, okay, we have a website. If people want to know about the facts, they can come and get them. Right? This is a very old school way of thinking about science communication. Then there's a more intermediate step where you think about science communication about different segments and trying to think more about not just the message, but also the recipient of the message. So what do young people want? How can we, get people to like science? How can we make them feel enthusiastic about this? It's kind of thinking a little bit more about the recipient of the message, but it's still somewhat instrumentally thinking about, okay, about yourself, about other science communicators. Now, the third model is more about thinking about co-production. So it's the idea, okay, what are people actually saying? What are their concerns? How can we listen? How can we have a better conversation? Now, I'm not saying, definitely not, that you should engage in one model and not the other. Also, not all activities or science communication careers can be neatly aligned to any of those. So you can have some dissemination activities and some co-production activities. You can also have one activity that starts out as a co-production activity be a dissemination activity, and that's totally fine. There's a huge variety of things. I would just say that many people believe, or I would just say that reflecting upon these models is important in thinking about what type of science communicators we want to be. And I think more often we should be considering this co-production style more often. Okay, let's go to the literature a little bit. This is kind of an analytical framework used by Trench about different styles or different models of science and technology communication. Lots of text, but let me break it down quite simply. There's these three different models of base communication models on the very left-hand side. Dissemination, it's the idea that, well, you just have facts and you give it to the public. And, you know, from a very critical standpoint, you see the public as some ignorant collection of people. They're often hostile to science or misinformed, and it's your job to persuade them, and you use kind of a marketing approach of science, trying to persuade the public. And the model has been called, the model of looking at the public here, this public and expert interaction, has been criticized as the deficit model. I'm going to say something about that in the next slide. Then there's, I guess, in the last decades, increasingly also ministries and funding bodies have engaged more in the dialogue model, thinking about, okay, how can actually bring stakeholder and how can we get stakeholders involved in communication activities, thinking a bit more about the recipients of messages, using, for example, sociological behavioral science insights to figure out how do people actually receive these messages and how can they be better targeted. And doing that has led to the understanding that, yeah, people have different information needs and they process information differently. And we need to learn more about how they process information, and we need to learn more about different needs of societies so we can take on better issues. So it's a bit more dialogical. Good. So it's the language of consultation, engagement, context. And then there's the kind of the most participatory model of science communication, which engages in conversation. There's aspects, there are different deliberative models of how you really take people's viewpoints seriously, how you engage their critique in the production of science, for instance, but also in the communication of science, thinking about how can citizens actually shape what we do as scientists, and to some extent set the agenda, and how we can be better and understand how different meanings of science are debated. So it's kind of the more co-productionist approach to science. And 𝗂𝗏𝗃, who's you can check out the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. They have run 3 excellent workshops on the science of science communication. So I think in 3 different years, they invited lots of different scholars to think about the science of science communication. And I think the last one was shortly before COVID hit. And it's a very interesting, just multidisciplinary view of what we know about science communication from a scholarly perspective. And here's another model that kind of criticizes, or that shows critiques of the deficit model that I mentioned just now. So the deficit model is the idea that big societal problems can be mostly addressed by science, better science communication. So it's the hope that if only there was a better science literacy, if people only knew more, if people only had the facts, then something would be better. Whether that's acceptance of man-made climate change, or knowledge and adherence to measures against the coronavirus, or many other things where we have a lot of knowledge and where implementation is lacking. If only the public would be more literate, scientifically literate, then we would live in a better world. And so that's the critique of that, is that, of course, not all problems in society are epistemic, meaning that not they're big social, structural, problematic issues of wealth concentration, issues of unequal power distribution, that are not epistemic problems about what we know and who knows it, but bigger societal problems that kind of can't be solved by just giving people the facts or educating people. So the idea that science communication can and should and is able to solve all these big problems is kind of a misconception, and is kind of based on this deficit model. And the model 2 is the idea that we should engage more closely with society and actually react towards stakeholders and participants. Whereas model 3 is kind of really taking in insights from other sciences, such as the humanities, and thinking about, no, people actually, their perception of the world is mediated by, for example, media or social media, and how they see the world. We need to understand better how they see the world, how we see the world, and we need to all see ourselves as part of a conversation in society, not outside of society, but inside society. And it's about science in society, discussing and having a better conversation about science. So it's kind of not thinking that scientists are somewhere outside the public, but that scientists are inside the public. And but also, you know, we are all social animals ourselves and part of society, and acknowledging that. And that means also that we are open about uncertainties, that we are open about our normative values, about that we are attentive to political context, and so on. And that helps make sense of a lot of issues with science, because there are many studies, for example, that show that if you give, well, education alone is not a good predictor of whether okay, let me skip that part, but just leave you with these two kind of more theoretical and conceptual examples and bits of information about the deficit model and models of science communication. Okay, of course, I have the obligatory advertisement part of the talk, where I talk about the Global Year Academy, as I always do. And just apart from being more engaged science communicators, I hope that we can all be more global science communicators, think beyond borders. I think COVID has really shown that we can learn an enormous amount by looking at how different countries reacted. We can all learn from each other, so it's always worth taking a global perspective. These are examples from some of our members that try to communicate science in a very digital and a very hopefully well-informed and very engaged participatory manner that I can recommend that you check out. It also helps if you have a community. So in our case, we have this informal WhatsApp group where we try to lift each other up. So people are basically trying to share what they're posting on different channels, and we try to amplify each other. So this is an example of kind of having an additional community. And later, I want to come back to the question that I asked initially: what should the future of digital science communication look like? I really hope that we end up with engaged and thoughtful contributions to a digital conversation about science and technology in society from the 99%. The 99%, that's you, that's me, that's all of us. It's not just those with big production budgets, but creating science on the fly and creating science on the side, so communicating on the science. And I really hope you join me in this engaged and thoughtful digital conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the wonderful talk. Any questions from the participants?
I have a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, Robert, are you familiar with reaction videos? And if so, do you have any thoughts on how useful it is to build a conversation with the participants rather than disseminating information?
Right. So you were asking you were asking about reaction videos. Can you specify what you mean?
So in YouTube, you can have reaction videos on specific subjects. So a lot of you say, I'm a historian, so I'll take up popular history videos which are already present, and I react to them live, and people would come in with comments and maybe suggest more videos I can react to. So it's a longer format. You can react to maybe 20-minute videos also, and people will still listen to the original content as well as your reactions. So you have a way of narrating your thoughts as well as piggybacking of existing influencers.
I think that's a great strategy. One more question to you: is it working for you? What are the what's the impact that you're having with that?
I haven't done it, which is why I was asking. You were talking about Twitter and all of those which have shorter formats, and I'm more interested in longer format.
Great. I think it's fantastic that you're interested in longer formats because we definitely need also the high quality 1% longer videos of important science communication. I know, for example, Felix Bast, who's doing a great job of giving an overview about news in science. I think you know his YouTube channel. It's one of the examples of that takes a lot of time to doing that. But yes, piggybacking on others is always a good idea. It helps if, of course, if the quality is already high of the channel or the creator that you're reacting to. You have to be careful if it's a popular account that is misinforming how you react to that, because you could amplify misinformation by reacting to people who are factually incorrect. But if people have good intent, you can usually tell if people are trying to communicate in good faith, and if they're good faith science communicator or storyteller or whatever, then there could be a productive discussion about you reacting to the video, could actually get some of their community into being your community. So this is a very, very good way of making connections. That also works on other platforms. But you have to take care that you're not kind of just fact-checking and putting a negative spin on it, but it needs to be a kind of constructive dialogue. But in general, yeah, reaction videos are always good and always help to bring in communities over to your platforms. It's a very good strategy. More questions?
Hi, it was a really insightful session. I had a question. So you mentioned that the quantity matters on social media platforms as it would help in a wider public reach. I was wondering about whether it might also move in the direction of overabundance of information. So how to tackle or navigate that aspect?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I think it depends a lot. I think generally we vastly overestimate how many people see our posts, especially on Twitter. If you post something, you can always see how many people see it, and it's vanishingly low because and it really depends on the algorithm. So I think the first answer would be it depends on the platform. On LinkedIn or Instagram, I think if people post a lot, you see it immediately and it crowds the feed a little bit. But on Twitter, I think you can post, unless you post like 200 times a day, people won't really notice it too much. Mm-hmm. So it matters a bit on it. But I wouldn't worry in the sense of, okay, what do people think of me if I post my paper again? This really doesn't matter, because it might be seen by a policymaker or someone from a funding agency who only goes there once in a while and comes across it, and then you will be happy that you posted it 20 mm-hmm. times rather than just once.
Yeah, yeah, that helps. Thank you.
It was a wonderful session. So we learned a lot of things. Apart from the fact of how we could communicate, we also learned different things which we didn't know initially, like TikTok can be a good platform for communication. So I have a question that is the quantity or the number of times we communicate can be controlled, but how to increase on the quality of the science which we want to convey to the audience, and how to judge what type of audience is there, and then decide on how to frame our science in a particular way.
Yeah, this is a really critical question, and I don't have a good answer to that, because this is something I struggle with too. Sometimes people say, well, I don't want to communicate science. Okay, I don't think everyone everyone needs to be like an out-and-out science communicator, as some of the people that I showed you are, right? Not everyone needs to be doing that, but I wish overall, generally, as a collective, as a community of scientists, we would engage in that more. But then also funding agencies I talk to, they say not all science needs to be communicated to the same degree, right? And I guess depending on the societal issues at hand, maybe some topics are more important right now. I mean, COVID, climate change, of course, are the obvious ones. But then the question is who's to tell, right? Who decides what is the relevant science content to produce? And I think too often, or I think we think too little about this. Or we try to make the decision as scientists, okay, it's really important to speak about climate change now, let's do climate change, and we're kind of forgetting other things that we should be communicating about. So one way to help with this is just for all of us to document a little bit more about every day, to explain a little bit about our field, even if it's, you know, more fundamental, not as applied, not directly relevant to societal issues, just to have this stock, this archive, these like videos somewhere that could be leveraged. I mean, how amazing would it be to have all these? Imagine that we had all these people, virologists, epidemiologists, being very active digital communicators before COVID, right? We could go back and say, listen, like people were warning about this, people were talking about this, and of course there is lots of evidence out there. But you know, it's always better to have more more archival material to go back on. And as a community, if we do more of that, I think we will be more resilient in the future for different problems where our knowledge will be required.
One follow-up question would be, in a society which is dominated by pseudoscience and different non-scientific beliefs, where the majority of the public, in spite of the fact of learning elementary science, but not believing and practicing that, being the majority or being the mass, how to try to instill scientific views and thoughts in them through the communication process. And sometimes we are overwhelmed with different claims on different pseudoscience going on. So how do we address this?
Yeah, this is a tricky question. Also, because I guess you asked this also against the Indian context, which I'm not an expert on, right? So I can't really speak to that. I can only speak about my context and the context that I know. But I would say so. What, especially in Germany, but also in the US and the UK, what we have totally underestimated is not the lack of scientific literacy of the masses, but there was a more distinguished problem with lack of scientific literacy of leadership and having clever ways of getting the science to leadership and communicating this in an open way. So I think in the past, looking too much in the deficit model and thinking too much about, okay, what is it that people, the general masses, don't know, hides a bit the fact that we have a real problem if we have people like Bolsonaro in Brazil, who is who was like not a climate change, who didn't trust climate science, who didn't listen to the public health experts, and so on. And so I think science communication needs to really pay attention, not to just look at the uneducated masses, but especially also look at science advice and communication of science to decision makers. So yeah, I think it's a very difficult two-way street there. But then of course, it would also be too much to say, okay, now we just need to co-produce and let kind of the citizens determine scientific methodologies, and that's of course not what I'm saying. And also, there are many people who really seek out scientific facts. Of course, I mean, people want to know how they can best shield against COVID, and they want to understand, right? So there is always going to be a role for the dissemination model and for the didactic of science. I mean, that's what we do most of our day as being teachers and teaching students. And of course, that will never go away. But still, I think we need as science communicators to think about these different models of science communication, about dissemination, about participation, about co-production, and just be mindful about who we're communicating to, whether that's the masses or policy makers, and be flexible in this regard. I also have now the results from the Mentimeter, which I would like to show, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So
first I have what does really bad science communication look like? Which is interesting because there's a lot of promoting pseudoscience and spreading rumors, which I understand is it's a problem everywhere, but from my Indian colleagues is also a big problem in India. And of course, there are various methods of tackling that, and it's also depending on who you ask or how you can tackle that, right? I mean, if you ask behavioral economists or behavioral scientists, then they would say, okay, new research shows that you can inoculate against misinformation. So basically, you tell people, okay, be careful. You might encounter fake news or you might encounter pseudoscience, and be aware of the motivations of people sharing it and so on. And if you do that, then this actually enables people to be more resilient and to be more to call out pseudoscience and fake news for what it is. So there are strategies, but if you ask other people who say, no, actually, this might be a nice kind of small fix, but actually what we need is better welfare states. We need more investment in our education system. We need better, we need better well-paying jobs and health facilities and sanitation facilities and all these other bigger societal questions. And then, rather than focusing on this like tactics on how we get people to not believe in individual fake news, asking different scientists gives you different answers for how to tackle pseudoscience. Some are more systemic, some structural answers, some are more technical intervention answers. So this is kind of the really bad science communication Menti. And then there's also the your motivation Menti. And coming back to the most important question is, who are you? So why do you Cycom? And maybe we can talk a little bit about that also going forward. And I see lots of range of replies here. You want to engage people. You want to teach rural population. You want to learn more, see fascinating faces, spark interest in science, provide relaxation. Very interesting comment, generate interest, and so on. So you see there's a huge diversity of science communication motivations out there, and it's always be great to know that the other people who communicate have so very different motivations too. Okay, so these were the mentees.
Yeah, so any more questions?
So I had a comment to make. So like science communication should not just be about spreading science awareness among the public, but like Robert mentioned, that it should also involve two-way interactions wherein the audience voice their opinions and ask questions, have discussions with the content generators, and this is now becoming possible through the social media platforms, as he pointed out. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And sorry, did you have another point to make?
No, just this one. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, and just there are many different forms that this could take. I mean, there's science slams or kind of science festivals that are more lively and more engaged. There are kind of citizen science activities. These are kind of the most extreme form of co-production in science communication. But I think you don't need to make a science festival or a science slam or have a science a citizen science account. It's more about attitude. Are you as a scientist willing to listen and learn and understand how people communicate and understand not that they're spreading misinformation, but why, right? And particularly with COVID, I mean, many explanations for why, for example, people spread misinformation is related to notions of psychological belonging. They want to belong to a group, and this is what helps them belong to a group of people who spread this message, or they are afraid of having economic impact, being economically impacted by the virus, so they rather harmful, right? Or they there are various mechanisms that explain why people, for example, share fake news or consume pseudoscience. And one is that things are so complex and overwhelming that having a simple answer is more psychologically comforting, right? And then and engaging more with these reasons for why people, and rather than just saying, okay, here are the facts, I think it's important to, you know, to have a better conversation overall, and understand it's not just about the science. Sorry, go ahead, 𝗥𝗃𝗧.
No. So we also, like the researchers and scientists, also learn in the process while they are communicating science. So that is also another aspect. It is not just that they are just communicating it, but also learning in the process.
Yeah, you said that very nicely. I should put that on the slide. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes,
So
thank you
Robert,
so much.
let me provoke you a bit.
Go for it.
So I was wondering, you know, often we have people talking about this problem of pseudoscience and fake news and a lot of stuff going around. And I have had colleagues who say that, you know, there's no point doing science communication because you will never reach out to the masses the way, you know, WhatsApp messages on pseudoscience does, because there's just too much of it. And then what is the point? So as a person who is interested in science communication, how do you respond to that kind of question?
Yeah, great question, of course. Maybe by not. So I've talked a lot about the need for more scientists communicating, but that by itself, even if we all started communicating, that wouldn't solve many of the big problems we have, right? So first, it's about managing expectations. How can we get a handle on spread of misinformation? Huge question. But there are definitely things involved that scientists can't do, namely regulating, for instance, the corporations that thrive on the attention economy. Meaning, if your business model is predicated on you making money with absurd claims, then you need to regulate that industry, right? Now, if the platform sits in a different country, then it's not even your decision makers in your national context's purview, and they can't do anything, right? So these are huge questions of regulation and policy that scientists can't solve, right? So, so maybe one thing that we could do is get clever about the policy measures, so understand better how we can regulate, for example, big tech, and or move to different platforms that thrive on other business models. And you know, this conversation needs to be had. At the same time, it doesn't mean abstaining from social media. And I think being present, even to a minimal degree, is absolutely necessary, because it's not so much that we might convince the people who spread the fake news, but it's about this third-party bystander that looks at this and isn't quite sure, and then someone just posts a video to something else or posts a paper to something else, and that will be enough for those people on the fence to not go down the route of misinformation. So just being present, just, you know, showing up in the deep comment section on Facebook and just saying, sorry, I'm a scientist, that isn't right, here's a paper, here's a link, costs you 2 seconds to do that. Just do that, and you won't convince the people who posted it, but you will steer the conversation ever so slightly in a better direction. And I think if all of us did that, we would have a better conversation for sure.
Thank you.
Robert, I have a question.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. So in places like India, where so intercity and rural populations have access to maybe 10% or up to 40%, depending on where you are in India, rural populations and intercity populations have access to smartphones. So it is just starting. It's not really matured. And if we engage them through social media to get them interested in science, we are also introducing them to the whole world of misinformation that is already available. So would you suggest that we try to open up other dimensions through other applications which are more engaging? For example, sky map, eBird, iNaturalist, things like that. People can use their existing knowledge and engage with the world in a more meaningful way with a greater community and participate in science and new information at the same time, creating new information at the same time.
Thank you. That's a fascinating question. And as you will see from my talk and from my experience, I mean, in Germany and in much of Western Europe, we have a really high coverage of, you know, there's not as big a digital divide as there is in other parts of the world. So, of course, my talk was very much flavored by that. So, I think your question is super important for India and other places around the world. And so I don't have an excellent answer here, but I think it's so pressing to get this right, because there will be lots of path dependencies. Once you start introducing all these possibilities anew, it will be hard to change them again. So and I don't know what would be a good strategy, and I would be interesting to hear more of your views. For certain, big things need to be happening. So in the sense of it will be quite hard to have a top-down regulatory approach here to introduce something from above that curates the access to apps or information that people new to social media have. I think that's very hard to find a governance model for. It's a very tricky question. I don't have a good answer. You mentioned all these. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I'll tell you why I said this, because I have worked with a group, and they were working on a project for introducing a small community to smartphones. And the funding was from a group which basically is a network, service provider, internet service provider. And they wanted us to create, so our idea was to create a Wi-Fi network, a mesh network within that area, so that everyone could have access to the smartphone without bothering about costs. And the motivation for the company was eventually, once they had caught on to smartphones, then they could introduce the paid services eventually. So what I mean is, companies do think of it in these long arcs, whereas we don't. So we are competing with them in a way.
Yeah. So one question is how to, I mean, it sounds fascinating how you can communicate with the companies to make sure that that high quality information is always accessible. Yeah, I guess, what partnerships can you leverage to solve this specific question? I mean, it's how can you work together with the companies? I don't have a good answer for this, but it seems like a very important topic. Yeah.
Adding to what Anandroop said just now, I think apart from utilizing these applications using smartphones, we might also think of utilizing offline means of communication, since as Anandroop pointed out, a major part of India still does not have access to the internet. Like if we're talking about country-specific interventions that we could have with respect to science communication.
Yes, yeah. Mm. And I know that Anindita has also been thinking about this, about not just about access in underserved areas, but also about online education and accessibility of education materials and so on. So this belongs together not just for science communication, but also in education models and so on. And the need for that has been shown by COVID. Any other questions?
Okay.
Good. Then if there are no other questions, then let me please invite you to contact me on social media if you have any specific questions on different platforms. If you want feedback on some of your profiles, I'm always happy to help you. And if you have also things that you want to see retweeted, amplified, let me know, tag me. I'm happy to use the small following that I have to amplify your work and your ideas. I hope some of this was helpful, and going forward, yeah, please tag me and I will try to help you amplify your message as well. Thanks all.
Thank you so much, Robert, for joining us and giving a wonderful talk. We learned a lot of things and I hope we can implement them in our lives and be better science communicators, and we can look forward to a better scientifically sound society in the future.
Thank you so much.
I would request everybody to please turn on their camera if possible so that we can have a group picture.
I'm seeing lots of good science communicators all of a sudden.
Thank you so much for joining with us. Let us all thank Robert for being here with us. And
Thank you.